Is the era of head-to-head next-generation launches between the major console makers over, and what effects could this have on the future cadence of hardware? For many generations, we've seen new console launches that have either been simultaneous within weeks of each other or within the span of a year. Microsoft broke away from this trend in 2017 with the launch of the Switch and has since followed an offset cycle to Sony and Microsoft. Given what has transpired with the Xbox business recently, there is reason to believe that Microsoft may be bowing out of console hardware or pivoting to a living room PC market where it is no longer competing with Sony directly. Could the result be that console makers no longer base their timelines for successive hardware on a need to compete with when they expect rival hardware to launch? And could this in turn result in lengthier cycles that allow the hardware makers to extract the maximum value from a larger install base? Nintendo waited over 8 years to follow up on the original Switch, knowing that there was no direct threat to their lane that they had to contend with. So basically, pretty obvious, rather lengthy question there, however, which is the concept of the console generation over? John?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we were just kind of talking about this earlier, right? In terms of like release cycles being increasingly lengthy. But I think it all just comes down to software support more than anything at this point. And I think the release cadence of the consoles is starting to matter less and less as well, just because. So on that front, I think it matters less because the hardware itself is all so much more similar than it used to be, right? So like developers are just going to continue to do their game development sort of like out of sync with whenever the hardware is coming out for the most part, right? It takes X amount of years to make their game. If it happens to overcross like a console launch, then that adds some additional work for sure, but then they essentially just bring the game to that new platform as well. And that's what we've been seeing. So I think we're just at a point where this traditional sort of rollout doesn't really matter anymore.
Yeah.
Like it's not important because also the increases we're seeing from the hardware don't fundamentally alter the games anymore, right? Like I'm finishing up a retro video now. When you just look at, again, that jump from like PlayStation to PlayStation 2, the leap in terms of what was possible to achieve was so drastic. Like the same types of games couldn't really exist on both. And when you did it, you had to make a different game entirely because it just conceptually, like what you were trying to do on PS2, like a lot of times just you couldn't do it on the older hardware. And that's just not the case anymore. You can always scale things down. You can always find a way to make it work. And as a result, I think they just don't feel the need to, there's no real need to like try to make everything release around a similar time anymore, right? So that's my take.
Right.
Anyway.
I think also the fact that games are so expensive to make these days that they have to basically run on anything at this point. It's got to kind of run on sort of Steam Deck upwards, which basically does bring into question the, what impact new hardware will bring if it's still running the same games. Oliver, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm kind of mixed. In part, I think there are good reasons to align launches, and if not launches, then certainly align hardware specs, because like you guys have said, that you need to consider the broad market of gaming devices when you launch games. If you're shipping a game in like 2027 or 2028, you're going to need to support a wide range of hardware, and PS6 and next gen Xbox will slot into that, and there needs to be some commonality and spec commonality and capabilities between different hardware platforms so you can ship games across a variety of different systems. But I also think that at the moment, it's probably becoming more of a two-horse console race, and then off in the corner you have PC. PC is kind of doing its own thing. It's continuing to advance in kind of stepwise ways as as the years go on, as architectures advance. And I think Xbox is slotting in more into that PC zone where it's a little bit, it's just getting those PC ports, and really it's like the PlayStation 6 that's setting that common spec. I think that might be going on a little bit more there with the next generation of console games, assuming the next generation Xbox is not like a gigantic sales hit, which I mean, it may yet be. But yeah, I would think it's really, there's some degree to which it's more about stewardship of the whole ecosystem, and that can align some of the incentives with competitive incentives that you might have had in the past. But at the moment, it's just kind of, remains to be seen exactly how Microsoft slots into that ecosystem with their next generation hardware effort. I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, I think, everything that we're sort of seeing from the Magnus Leap kind of suggests that it's going to be a device that is going to be extremely powerful, but also very, very expensive by console terms, but relatively affordable by PC terms. So the way they actually market it is going to be quite interesting, I think. And the extent to which there may be OEM devices that we've discussed at length before. The timing of it in terms of, the arrival of it, I think it's a great time, 2026 to 2028. It's a great time to basically introduce those devices, because we are now starting to reach a sort of critical mass of PC GPUs out there that are actually capable of really good ray tracing performance, so capable of really good machine learning performance. So maybe, the concept of a generation isn't so much 2020 to 2028, an 8-year cycle. It's just a kind of evolving cycle. Certainly the thing that you kind of suggest that's suggested by the AMD partnership with Microsoft is that they can actually tap into the much shorter sort of lifespan of devices, upgrading 2 or 3 years rather than 8 years, just keeping up with PC in that regard. But the basic question is the concept of a console generation over? I'd say not for now, but probably by the end of the decade would be my sort of quick take on that.